We already almost 5 minutes through, so I'm starting this session on exploring transdisciplinary and actionable knowledge co-production across the bottom-up land system transformation. This is a session organized by Andressa, Unai, Julie, myself, and the entire team of the BridgingVALUES project. Just to give you a short intro of the project, in BridgingVALUES, we try to map flows, material and immaterial flows of EU conservation policies, and try to assess on how they land in different landscapes on the ground and what impacts they have in these areas. We have 3 objectives. It's to study local contexts, as I said, the manifestation of those flows on the ground. We want to assess how values are being transported through those policies, how they're being changed, and how they change values on the ground, if and how, and to assess impacts on equity and justice. Another third element of this project is the active engagement of the local stakeholders. We aim to co-develop pathways for desirable futures with them. And this is the bridge to the session. So we're implementing or trying to implement a transdisciplinary approach with co-production methods on the ground. So we would like to give an input on our experiences and then see what you bring on the table and have a joint discussion on how this can move forward. Andressa, do you want to introduce the session?
Okay, thank you everybody for being here. After the party yesterday, I think everybody feels a bit tired, so we want to have a session that everybody engages with in the discussion time. And so we have 8 speakers today, and we ask the speakers to keep their presentations to 8 minutes, and then we would have time for discussion in the end at around 20 minutes. And then we are not taking questions because we're going to have discussion on the topics of transdisciplinarity. I would like to take a moment to do a quick check-in in the audience, and then we get to know who is the audience. So stand up, please, if you ever applied participatory approach in your work. Very well. Okay, you can sit down. Thank you. Stand up, please, if you worked with or think you have worked with transdisciplinary research before. Great. And please stand up if you consider yourself an interdisciplinary researcher. Wow, we have a very diverse audience. And stand up, please, if you are not a researcher. No? Okay, good. Great. Okay, we have another type of audience. That's great. Okay, so we're going to have these presenters and our discussion, and we ask presenters to think about this question. So, what principles should transdisciplinary research approach having in practical to facilitate transformative change in land systems at local level? So everybody had this question in mind when doing the presentations, and we are going to think about this question for the discussion part. And so these are more detailed questions that we gave to presenters, and then we are going to try to also discuss these during the presentations and in the discussion part. So with that, I would like to introduce Elif, that is going to present on also her work in the BridgingVALUES project. We have 3 presenters in our project, and then we open for other speakers to bring their views on transdisciplinarity. So the first presentation, please.
Okay, thank you. I'm Elif. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Wyss Academy for Nature at the University of Bern, Switzerland. I'm originally from Turkey, and this is a photograph I've taken in the paddy fields of Laos PDR, one of the case studies. And our part of the funding comes from the Swiss National Science Foundation. So I was given the assignment to advance the state of the art in transdisciplinary co-production methodologies that allow working hand in hand with and incorporating the knowledge of stakeholders. There are already 2 frameworks that were part of the proposal, the Wayfinder approach, which I will not be talking about that, but it's a really useful approach that is inspired by the systems change thinking and developed by our colleagues, partnering colleagues from Stockholm Resilient Unit, Stockholm University. And our consortia has agreed to use a 3 Horizons framework, which is about envisioning future sustainability narratives and sustainable futures with various stakeholders taking part in the case studies. And I am developing an additional thinking, which I'm calling it, inclined to call it epistemic multimodality. So I will try to talk a little bit about that. And given our topic, our project is called BridgingVALUES. Therefore, I play with the metaphor of the bridge, bridging transdisciplinarity, but I also use the metaphor of weaving. A conceptual approach I'm trying to think of on transdisciplinary research design that brings pluriverse knowledge systems through multimodal medias that adapt various epistemologies for transformative science. My background is visual and environmental anthropology. That is the reason why I work a lot with media. And here, a great inspiration comes from the Quechua-speaking people of Peru, who are actually weaving a bridge for centuries. And they do that as a masterpiece Inca declared as a UNESCO Intangible Heritage. They twist straw into ropes and weave the bridge. They're weaving their past into the future, one strand at a time. We've started applying some of the ideas in our case study as the Wyss Academy were responsible for the Lao PDR, Namet Pule National Park. And there our team has initiated a lot of dialogue and a lot of relationships with the various stakeholders. So you will hear more from them in the next presentations. There we started with a field mission, we signed a letter of agreement, and next our PhD students are conducting their own research questions on values and flows. And there will be very soon stakeholder engagement events, particularly focusing on 3 Horizons. And again, I've seen a lot of women weaving and weaving and weaving, which really inspired me, also not only visually, but also metaphorically and in abstract thinking. Here's our team signing a letter of agreement. Because it's a hierarchical structure there with the stakeholders, we came up with the idea of creating a feedback mechanism that would have focus groups with village levels, provincial, national, and again going back to the provincial level. But I don't go to detail because this is the terrain of our PhD students. So it is very important to have a micro approach, as you see the silkworms. And it's also important to have a macro view of how the weaving practice can work in transdisciplinary settings, not only in understanding socio-ecological systems, but also going beyond academic disciplines. How do we bridge? How do we weave the academic disciplines? So it is very important to ensure systems see themselves. There will be tensions. It's not a comfortable work. Cultivating trust is not also easy, but needed. Aligning a shared purpose and vision, fostering experimental action, and constantly facilitating collective unlearning. So transdisciplinarity is not something we can define, in my humble opinion, and that we expect to agree each and all of us. but it is something we can continuously learn and unlearn. It's a process, it's a journey. Multimodalities. I wish I could deep dive you, but imagine an octopus has many tentacles, and multimodality can be a lot of these things: websites, documentaries, audiovisuals, photography. So I worked a lot on affective multimodalities as a conceptual methodology during my PhD, which was also funded by the SNF. It was mostly with the displaced youth. And a current publication that is just coming out on indigenized multimodalities, and this is the next one I'm working on, which is the epistemic. How do we bring different representations of knowledge? I was very inspired by Malcolm Ferdinand, maybe some of you know, a political ecologist who's talking about fractions, especially in collaborations between global and the north and the south. So he's using the analogy of a wrecked ship, learning from the Caribbean, the big story of slavery, and I'm using the metaphor of a seed growing. So here's what I'm working on now. I will very soon end the presentation. With our team, we had the first step of trying to sense the system where we are at with a questionnaire that had reflexive story readings with a new method that I'm experimenting, AI-generated visual evocations. I can always tell you more about it later. And I also asked our consortia scientists to think and create their own transdisciplinary game. I skip. For our consortia scientists, as part of the initial questionnaire, participation and collaboration was one of the most important aspects of transdisciplinarity. And most of us acknowledge that we position ourselves in Western, but not only, but also in Eastern thinking and knowledge systems. I also asked, how would it be like if transdisciplinarity was a music? So some of our members said it is like an orchestra, it's like jazz, it's like moshing. I don't know if you ever heard moshing. And then it is also like Beyonce because it keeps shifting genres. And also it is like a rubric game. It is like a German game which is trying to build a tower together collectively, not in competition. And also like Quidditch from the famous Harry Potter. And definitions the scientists were giving that when they were explaining who they are, what disciplines they're representing, they used the metaphors of interface, in between, margins, bridging, triangle, which we then used to create a game that looked like this. Thank you.
Okay, so the next presenter is myself. So I'm going to introduce a case study that it's on the BridgingVALUES project. And right there. So before I start, I want to invite everybody here to think about a landscape, a rural landscape in the surroundings of a city where there are many villages. And these villages, they have a really strong cultural identity that is related to their traditions, their language, their roots. And this cultural identity relates a lot with their place attachment. So with that in mind, think about this landscape. And now that you imagine that, there are many sustainability challenges in this landscape. They are related to the nexus of the energy, many projects, interventions on energy, solar panels and energy production in the land. There is also the challenge of biodiversity conservation, so land for that, and land for production, and also the conflicts with agroecology and large-scale agriculture. All this complexity, plus the values of place attachment of people, gives a collective action problem that the actors on the ground, they compete and negotiate for different interests and resources, and gives us an opportunity also to thinking about Eduardo's Brundi's talk that we need to work not for the people on the ground, but with people on the ground. Our project brings this transdisciplinary approach to understand and explore action pathways to understand this governance of the biodiverse energy and food nexus. Okay, so our case study is located in the European Green Capital in the north of Spain, the Basque Country, in Vitoria-Gasteiz. This area in yellow is the rural area of the city. And surrounding the area, there is a green belt, and there are 3 Natura 2000 areas with high biodiverse richness. Okay, it's that way. In this rural landscape, there are 63 villages, and they have a common property management that precedes the Middle Age. So their governance is shared, and also there's a multi-level governance on all the governance of this nexus that comes from the EU level, and then the national level. Then you have the Basque government. You have the regional government, the city council, and then you end up seeing this common property management. Thank you. So the complexity also relates to the governance of this region. Okay. So with that in mind, we have our approach triangulates different methodologies to understand this complexity, and also to assess the impact on the ground. So we are using discourse analysis to assess the multi-level environmental policies, how these affect the social-ecological system. We are using QMET to identify values, which values shape the landscape on the ground. And the participatory approach that we use, it's the 3 horizons methodology and the causal loop diagrams that is going to understand all these that I said, the social-ecological impacts, they identify the values, but also collaboratively work with the stakeholders to develop, co-create a vision and action pathways to change this landscape. So for the just and sustainable land systems, which is the goal of our proposal, like to facilitate this process. There are many challenges when doing transdisciplinary research or even a participatory approach, and one of them in our project, it's because we are a consortia of 6 case studies, and we have 3 case studies in the Global South and 3 in the Global North. And as you can imagine, a lot of heterogeneity of case studies. So they are context specific, but we need also a common protocol for analyzing the data and make them this analysis comparable. So that gives a little another layer of complexity, because we need this in the same way, like a protocol for comparison, but also flexibility on the case studies, because we are 6. And the other challenge that I see regarding my case study, it's in relation to the stakeholder engagement. So when you go to the field and in a 3 years project, it's not so much time to build trust with the stakeholders if you are not working with them for a long time. So that takes a lot of investment in time, and also going to the field to build this trust. In my case study, also there are different interests, so it's really difficult to assess the stakeholders on higher levels, like private companies, the institutional actors that are in higher levels of governance, their motivation and interest to participate and also to assess them, it's very tricky. I'm finishing. So the other challenge that I see is to keep up the participation. Once you build trust, how you make these people motivate and commit to actually work with you on the workshops, on the ground, and then co-develop all these ideas, because there are different interests. They are going to feel sometimes that they might feel that their voice are not heard. So you need to work on the power imbalances as well. And there are possible conflicts over interest that we saw Pedro talking in the first day as well. Any land availability, there are trade-offs, and this gives also conflict. So we need to work on these power imbalances to make everybody in the workshops, their voice being heard, and also participating in the decision making of the area. So this is just a little bit of the complexness of transdisciplinary research from my point of view, from my case study. I'm doing my first workshop on November 20, and if there is any advice from this group or feedback that you want to give me, we can talk over the break, and I would be very happy to discuss these issues. Yes, thank you very much. Gracias. Obrigada. Okay, next presenter, Evan Frost.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for attending this session. My name is Evan Frost. I work with Lasse at the Center for Agricultural Landscape Research close to Berlin. And today I would like to invite you to visit discursive fields of agricultural policy. This does not seem to work. All right. So as I said, these discursive fields, they reach from the EU right to a biosphere reserve in eastern Germany, the Spreewald. It is a multifunctional cultural landscape supporting tourism, biodiversity, housing, fishing, etc., and also traditional agricultural land use. There is also an ethnic minority living in the Spreewald, the Sorbs and the Wends, who have their own language. And here you can see a tradition which is painting Easter eggs for Easter. Right, so even though the Spreewald is a very unique landscape and a very unique biosphere reserve, it is still governed by culturally and geographically distant regulations by the EU. So in line with the overall Bridging Values theme, my dissertation tries to answer the question, or aims to answer the question rather, which values embedded in EU policies flow within a multi-level governance structure, so from EU through national to the local biosphere reserve. How are they altered and by whom? And how do they manifest locally with regards to justice and values? So the first step for that was to see what's actually in the policies, so which values are embedded in EU agricultural and biodiversity policies. For that, we conducted a critical discourse analysis, operationalizing the EPBES pathways, which correspond to the specific values of nature, as you can see here. And we also identified another discourse, which we coined the progress optimism, so the belief that technological, scientific, economic progress will solve social and ecological crises. So then the idea was to tie that to the local context, to local realities. which begs the question, how do you do that, right? We aim for a transdisciplinary approach in our case study, because the main idea here was to learn from diverse perspectives on values from a variety of local actors, including practitioners, farmers, nature conservationists, administrative employees, people from the tourism sector, people owning hotels, and so forth. We also wanted to have a co-creation process that allowed to reflect on lived experiences and discuss experience power asymmetries. Ultimately, this also allows us to tie these national and actually supranational discourses to the local context. Method-wise, we applied an adapted NetMap approach. NetMap is a participatory method combining social network analysis and power mapping. It is not inherently transdisciplinary, but it can be used to allow to include diverse knowledge, lived experiences, diverse perspectives from a variety of actors. As I said, we adapted the method a bit to track these discourses, to look at discursive power and elements of procedural justice within our local case study by identifying powerful actors, the goals, potential influencing between them, and then also powers of self-assertion. So here you can see a map that was co-created during one interview. The green post-its represent the different actors, links between them represent influencing. The icons in green next to them represent the discourses or the goals of these actors, and the number in red next to that represent the power in decision-making processes. And here you can already see, there's a bottleneck with the biosphere reserve management node at the top right corner. So next, besides this social network analysis, which is a bit quantified approach, this method also yields qualitative data based on the transcribed audio recording, because people will, elaborate, give examples, share experiences. So here I brought 3 quotes. I would like to start with one from a farmer who says he's essentially willing to participate in any agro-environmental scheme as long as he's paid for it. Then we have a conservationist who says that farmers are so dependent on EU subsidies, they can't think outside of the box. They can't imagine a different system. And then we have a biosphere reserve administrator who ties this to the discourse of green economy, essentially saying, payment for ecosystem services are the green economy, are part of the green economy, and farmers are our allies in that. They represent the green economy at grassroots level. So here, I think one can see that you can tie these discourses that take place at a policy level to also local context. Lastly, I would like to talk about trade-offs and benefits of applying or aiming for transdisciplinarity. For me, it was a very resource-intensive methodology, right? Planning, adapting, interviewing, having test interviews, trying to see how this method could work on the ground, inviting people to share their experiences was very time-consuming. This step then also required a limited regional scope, so findings may be less generalizable. But on the flip side, we gained a very rich understanding of the local socio-political political landscape, and the co-creation actually facilitated a sense of ownership and a deeper reflection among actors. So the willingness to further collaborate, form alliances based on this visualization of that map, seeing where power structures lie, actually increased. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. I think the next race, number 4. And número 4.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. I'm a member of the Bridging Values project, but I'm presenting some work from a different project to bring some approaches to transdisciplinarity to kind of foster some thinking. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Sabah in Borneo, Malaysia. These are our partners, the Borneo Institute of Indigenous Studies, Pascual Trust, Indigenous Rights Activist Organization, myself from Stockholm, and also from Research Institute for Humanity and Nature in Helsinki, University of Helsinki. What I want to say is also a bit of positionality. I am from Malaysia. I worked in this region for my master's studies 25 years ago, shockingly. But I'm coming back to look at the region in a different way with different eyes, and I think it's been a bit of a learning process for me as well. Okay, this is where Sabah is, just to position yourselves. It's in the middle of Southeast Asia on the northern island of Borneo. And when we talk about transdisciplinarity, I think we also have to look at history of the place. And I want to say that we talk about Sabah as a forest frontier, which is my project, but also it's been a forest frontier for a long time. Sabah was actually a concession. The entire state was a concession given to a couple of businessmen from Germany and from Britain. And it is then became part of the British North Borneo Company, which is the trading arm of the British Crown. And, one of the first things it did was to implement land ordinances to create vacant spaces for plantations, which is part of a narrative you will hear repeated throughout time. So industrial logging started in the 1950s. You will see the stamp that is from 1950s, where Sabah's logging has contributed much revenue to the British Crown, but also to the state. After independence, it contributed almost 90% of the state budget, and almost 80% of the forests have been partially or completely cleared. And then there was diversification into oil palm, rubber, industrial tree crops as part of development, and now it's into restoration, replanting, afforestation, timber plantations as a sustainable way of resource exploitation. So within this context, this is our research site. It is right on the tip of the island. This is an area where there has been a 60,000 hectare acacia plantation reforestation since the 80s, with the initial financial cash flow, a loan from the World Bank. This is also an area that is seen as the poorest even today. Mostly indigenous Rungas people in Chumburu, and local livelihoods are traditionally around Sweden agriculture and fishing, and now increasing small holdings of oil palm and rubber. We've done field work there for about a year and a half now. A lot of work on participatory research in focus group discussions across different ethnicities, different genders, Transact Walks participatory assessments, and also we've used photo voice, which is what I'm going to talk about the results from today in today's talk. So I just also want to say, if you see the map, the areas in yellow is the original concession, which is run by a company in joint venture with the state. So there is a state plays a large role in these flows. The area in green used to be a protection forest, but it's converted to a production forest, and now it's a timber plantation as well, eucalyptus, run by a company. There's oil palm everywhere, and the green dots are the villages where we work. So they are smack in the middle of the plantation, and they are fighting to reclaim their customary land that has been taken for these plantations. So what I want to do with the photo voice is I want to show a little bit how flows of discourses go, and you can see what I'm presenting now is the state discourse and also what the local voices are representing these issues. So the state says that the scheme is a solution to the primitive and non-productive shifting cultivation practices. What the locals have shown, and this is the pictures that they have taken, and this is their stories, This area is where our hill rice was planted, but they don't return to the land, of course, every year. It's 3, 5, 7 years for soil fertility, but this is what is seen by the state as unproductive. So the fallow lands are often taken for plantations. I'm just going to go very quickly. And then the state always says also, if you open a piece of forest and plant it, you can't leave it empty, because then if it's not continuously used, the state will take it back. And because of that, then they said if you're not leaving it empty, then the company is what will increase the value of forestry assets. And because of that, then what the local people have done is to try and keep these lands planted continuously, and oil palm became one option for such practices. But also then, what they've talked about is also now it's not just oil palm, but now oil palm and rubber have kind of replaced everything. It's become a cash economy, and everything revolves around income and cash and everything. So they are also very clear that this is their customary lands, and their customary rights have been robbed. And the third one is the state argues that if we give the land back, the people actually do not have attachment. This is kind of a state narrative, but here they talk about pressure and how this pressure and this development is only fair to one side and not fair to the other. And because these lands are seen as empty and uninhabited, therefore it's free to be taken. So these are kind of how they've been, their perspectives of the state narratives. And there's something that this is actually brand new data, so I just got this data like a month and a half ago, so we are just working through a lot of these narratives and understandings of perspectives. So, takeaways on transdisciplinarity. I think, as my colleagues have said, transdisciplinarity requires deep collaboration. Our partners have been working there since 1995. They've been through the processes of state claims, counterclaims, evictions, and court claims, and so on. Our data collection is also carried out by local village youths, which the community's members say, if you want us to be part of your research, you have to take our youths with you. So we've done a lot of capacity building, and we've worked with Indigenous teacher trainings and the Borneo Institute of Indigenous Studies. So I want to say that the Rulers people consider themselves as farmers. They have very strong sense of identity and attachment to the land. They are carrying out every days of local resistance as very complex state authority issues. And one reflection is, how does our work and our research and us as researchers fit within this complexity of contestations? By bringing these voices, what are the risks we also bring to local communities? So there's something that we need to think about. So I just end with some pictures of our civil sites. This is actually a quote from one of the guys who says, the government needs to open their eyes and not just go on social media, but go to the ground. The QR code is where you can get our project website. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Grace. And now we have Gabriela Garcia.
Soy Gabriela García Esqueda, and I live in Veracruz, Mexico, where I developed my PhD research in sustainability science in UNAM. And, this proposal is a transdisciplinary approach to peace stewardship in coffee agroecosystems. And first, I would like to acknowledge some relationships that made possible this proposal. The relations with agroecological coffee farmers, who are the guardians of the cloud forest in Veracruz, with Raquel and Ingrid that form Vianna, that is an NGO that has beautiful work with bees, and the curiosity of diverse academics involved in the process too, y a las abejas, que son mensajeras de las flores desde hace millones de años, que han tejido el mundo como lo conocemos y que creo que está más allá de nuestro entendimiento humano. yeah, sorry, speaking Spanish, but it's like more from the heart. Well, the next, please. Here. Okay, in Veracruz, we have this rich tradition of hive management as part of the livelihoods of the farmer families. However, by only focusing on these kind of bees that are social bees, we can neglect, or we can take apart some wild pollinators that are equally important for these agroecosystems. So in this context, my PhD centers on the question how to scale strategies of knowledge co-production that reflects the diversity of values associated to bees within a coffee agroecosystem. So under a transdisciplinary approach represented here in iterative cycles of collective construction and framing of the problem, also in knowledge co-production and application of knowledge, we implement diverse participatory tools. And I will now center in some of the part of this process that is a learning community named the Living School of Bees. So the Learning School of Bees is a learning community designed to foster bee stewardship and sustainable management. In the 6th generation, when I participate with my research, we had 5 itinerant modules with an average of 18 attendees, including beekeepers, biologists, coffee growers, NGO members, and academic collaborators. So, centering in the question of this group about the transdisciplinary research approach in the transformative change system. Now I will share some principles or some perspectives. For example, this situated and territorial perspective. We place ourselves and our activities in the basin in order to see each other. We enable dialogue between different forms of knowledge. Also, we had some workshops from a BI perspective and exercises to embodying the territory. We also discuss information derived for some palynological, that is the pollen, analysis of some local honey as another way to map or to read the territory visited by the bees. We invited those amazing women to share their experiences in using some hive products for healthcare. And we initiate all the sessions with an altar to recognize the people, the practices that led us to being in a particular moment within the overall process. And also some games, for example, to learn about these dishes. Okay, so we acknowledge that the management of the hives as part of a way of living, and in this we also recognize some innovation. For example, beekeeping focuses on the cycles and the biology of bees and not just only in honey production. Meliponiculture, that is stingless bees management, that notice different needs of the different kind of bees in different locations. The harvest moment becomes more like a ritual than the goal of the hive management, and some reforestation with melliferous species that we propose as an important activity of being a beekeeper. And in the application cycle, we co-design some communication materials using local names of bees and plants, and not just generic manuals. And also we did collective sketches that we present again to the group and have information, pictures, and formats relevant to them. So some of the challenge we face in this participatory research, for me, it's mainly the shift from hive management to bee stewardship, which includes shifting from technical content to in productivity to practices that acknowledge different values and relationships with bees and other pollinators, and transition to generic programs to territorial vision. In other words, to have more situated relational learning models where our work with bees can contribute to inhabit the territory as part of the network of life, as opposed to merely an ecological service that are for humans. So, muchas gracias.
Thank you, Gabriela. We have Julie now.
Yes, hello everyone. I hope my presentation title is an answer to this question of what principles should transdisciplinary research apply. Because we as the Care Operative Collective are arguing that we need a value-based approach as researchers. I'm Zähringer, I'm from the Wyss Academy for Nature and the University of Bern, but today I'm presenting on behalf of Dr. O. Care, and that's the pseudonym we are using to publish our collective work. So, we argue that sustainability transformations are inherently value-led processes, but yet in policy and research, the values behind such processes often remained unexplored, unexamined, and implicit. Okay, so we argue that without bringing these values behind processes in research and policy to the fore, these transformation-seeking processes can stumble. Next slide, please. There is a growing body of research, of course, in biodiversity science, in sustainability science, and recently synthesized by the IPBES value assessment that really goes deep in examining different communities, different stakeholders' values and arguing for acknowledging these plural and diverse values. However, there is still in research, now we are a bit too fast, not really a focus on the values of the individual researchers themselves, and even less so of the values in the research teams or the research collectives. So here we argue on the need for really centering values in our collaborative work, and I will describe now how we came about these values. So we met as a group of postdoctoral early career researchers that were brought together in this postdoctoral academy for transformational leadership funded by the Robert Bosch Foundation, where we learned a lot about individual leadership, but we also really had the ambition to develop our own models of collective leadership. So we designed a process with the help of an experienced facilitator to develop our own visions and ways of working. And in our joint work, we really put a lot of emphasis on the process of how do we work together more than actually the outputs. So it takes a long time until papers such as this one actually get published. In this work, we've become values-centered. We weren't really values-centered in the beginning, but then we emerged these values of inclusivity, collectivity, care, and reflexivity. Thank you. And we've been working together now in this collective for 5 years. And I will provide some insights from 2 of the case studies that we've conducted independently of our collective, just as the researchers in the research projects we work in, to show how these values came or didn't come into play. The first one was a project in Madagascar where the Swiss and the Malagasy researchers worked together in northeastern Madagascar to develop innovative approaches for land use and land governance that should lead to more equitable outcomes for well-being, but also ecosystem service provision. And in northeastern Madagascar, shifting cultivation is still the leading cause for deforestation, even if not the only one. And somehow the Swiss researchers in the project, they just assumed that somehow everybody was on the same terms regarding whether shifting cultivation is sustainable or not. they had adopted a normative stance that shifting cultivation should be allowed to thrive as long as it can replenish the nutrients and doesn't go into standing forests. But then a few years into the project, in a workshop with many different stakeholders, one of the Malagasy researchers basically said like, oh, the goal of the project is really to eradicate shifting cultivation from the landscape. And of course, it was only then when we realized that we came in with somehow different interpretations about the results of our research in these stakeholder processes. We directly engaged in a social learning process without even like looking at the different values prevailing in this team. And this means, for example, that stakeholders such as conservation organizations, they would use our results to argue that shifting cultivation should be banished, whereas local farmers would take them up and say, oh, hey, that's really to show that we should get more land back from the national park to practice our traditional livelihood practices. And maybe one reason why this happened in the team is also that a deep sense of collegiality and friendship had emerged, so the value of care was really foregrounded. But this left a certain unease to actually bring such diverging values to the fore, and this also means it requires a lot of skills and probably also external facilitation to really be able to go into such a process. Next slide. One of my colleagues in the collective had been working in the Tajik-Pamir region for a long time, first as a development practitioner and then as a resilience researcher. And in this region, like NGOs have been trying to improve food security, and in such workshops often they were very male dominated, and the predominant values that were brought forward were somehow materialistic and profit oriented, so they would call for increased better seed varieties, fertilizers, market access and so on. But then my colleague engaged in food, actually like a food celebration day, where they planned different ways of cooking sessions with different communities from the Pamirs. And through these very open and participatory workshops, actually very different stories were brought forward, especially from women who said, oh, the food that we buy on the markets really makes us sick, so we really want to be able to further pursue our traditional ways of farming, and also for example, reciprocity in times of need was extremely important. So this also showed how such an open process can really help to align the values the researcher brings into the process with the values of the communities. So specifically, centering values provides an invitation for research teams to critically reflect on the values that influence their research, negotiate different values when working together in diverse teams, elicit also the repercussions of centering values in collaborations, and focus on the values related on how to work together that resonate with the goals we are trying to pursue in our research. And I would also say, as researchers engaged in such sustainability transformations, we come with a lot of power into these processes, and somehow there is really a responsibility with making our values explicit. So lastly, based on our experience, a range of concrete lessons are maybe helpful to consider for others. So first, we really need to be clear in advancing and centering our values related to collaboration, surfacing different values in the groups and holding space for addressing these differences. Second, we need to co-develop skills for working together through conflicts as they arise in such value-centering processes, and they could really benefit from the support of specific sensibilities and capabilities, and also the help of researchers. And lastly, embracing surprise and responding through trial and error, reflecting periodically on the process and attending with care to relationships and processes. Thank you very much. Go to the last piece. So our paper is currently in press, and I hope I'll be able to share it with you all very soon. Thanks. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you, Julie. We have now Nathan Both.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for coming, and thanks for the Andressa in this group for allowing me to crash your session. So, I'm Nathan Both, and I'm from the University of Paraíba Valley in Brazil. And today we're going to talk about the Paraíba River Basin. We're going to talk about what are our problems there. We have, over several decades, it's been heavily deforested through decades of first the coffee boom and then ranching and recently urban expansion. They have lost their resilience and have been extreme hydrological events in the last few years. And this is highly important in Brazil, for it's in between both São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. So for the economy of Brazil, it's a highly important industrial area. And there are several restoration projects underway, primarily for conservation of biodiversity, carbon, and reducing these extreme events. There are international programs, too, for intervention for restoration. But what is happening right now is that there is, in Brazil, a polycentric governance of the basins. And right now, these projects are in between. We see the international NGOs, the state, and this basin responsible for every 4 years, required by law in Brazil to do restoration plans. However, we don't have the local population that we're talking about here for these landscapes. So the role of our laboratory and our research is to go from these basins, the bottom level, to grab the perceptions and the knowledge of the local populations to bring that up to inform these plans every 4 years. And it's focused on forests and all these ecosystem services from the top down. So what are these local populations and their needs? So one thing in recent research, other people, I think Pedro, who started the plenary, he had talked about there is some natural regeneration occurring, and they talk about that. But again, who are these local people and how are their perception, how are things varying across these populations? So we had one, and I'm going to do, these are some initial results, and mostly these are some master's and graduate students, and so these are initial evidences. So one study we took this cadastral of Brazil, and so that's what's based on the forest code that he talked about, and that's where you intervene on what's required by law to restore your forests. And when we divided that, and looking at it, we were able to classify them into small family farmers, basically, the new rural, which are people wealthier and have one secondary homes or retirement in these beautiful rural landscapes, or the industrial, like the fiber. And actually, when we looked at it there's quite a bit of difference. Who's over the last several years where the forests are regenerating, and we had very few in these small agricultural producers, moderate in the new rural, and actually quite high in the industrial. So then we started to go about them and their different perceptions of the local populations, like reforestation interventions and their challenges. So again, the state requirement by law on how to do that is very expensive. So the local populations have already requested to have their lands consolidated, which means they don't need to do that. There are also many of the new rural that are interested in it, but what they have is a lack of labor. And this was coming up even across all populations. We were studying some lack of labor that's going to keep occurring. And the small producers, one thing that was interesting is that they didn't have an interest, but in 2015, Brazil in this region had an extreme drought. And it's interesting that across that is finally an incentive other than education or bringing from the politics that also they are coming, that they really had wells had dried, many resources had. They are now getting interested and want to learn more on what they could do. So then we also had some studies of looking at, they have these planned reforestation interventions versus the natural regeneration. This natural regeneration that is occurring, and we're mapping with our tools, is pretty much still unknown to the committee of the basins, and there's still the narrative of heavy degradation, heavy deforestation. So we started to look at some of these factors and what do they look at it. Well, interestingly, is that some of the wealthier that want to have the money to do use the formal process for restoration, it actually overwhelmed that are closer to the larger pieces of forest, and actually on it's a very hilly region, on the more humid, south-facing slopes, that it would overwhelm these processes. So these types of policies don't even really hold in this case. Others have started to occur for the small holders. Again, lack of labor. Lots of the young have gone to the city, and some they just can't keep clearing. So there are just, even on theirs, there is some natural restoration. So interesting, I'll just go over this quickly. We did some perceptions on the rainfall change, and we have in which many part of this project that you're on are from. There is a convergence on local knowledge and perceptions that the wet season, you're getting fewer rainfall events, but you're getting more extreme events and having much more of the flooding. The dry season is getting longer and fewer rainfall events, which is harder for their cattle production. And actually, the scientific data is actually converging with that, even though the annual rainfall is staying the same. That distribution is becoming very important for the local livelihoods. And then we go to their perception on the impact of the long-term transformations that the top-down is trying to do. And interestingly, there locally, there is some resistance because they see the regeneration occurring is that the pioneer species on a degraded pasture landscape stays too long in these pioneer species, and it's drying their springs and their wells. And so they have a resistance, even advising the new rural sometimes not to do it or to cut it. So, and also, but the interesting thing, they revert back to what we can't see with our technology of satellite images, is that they revert back to the problems of the pasture grasses. Because in Brazil, they had what's called the gordo that was always there, and in the recent decades had turned to a brachiaria from Africa. That has brought, it's great, better for them as far as their, Ron Dizio was talking about, for their money, because deeper roots, and it can produce more cattle head over these drier seasons. But also, heavy rains, it works as a carpet. It just packs the surface. We have much more flooding in the wet season, and in the dry season it brings more drought. But they're willing to do this trade-off. They have lost some of their swimming holes, their fishing holes in the rivers because of this transformation. We just don't see this land change in this transformation in the satellite because it's just pasture. Okay, finish up the rest. This is on one of the payments for environmental services we did here with the New World. It was mostly captured, and why they had the successes. Who had adapted these new sustainable practices going forward. I won't go too far into that, but we can talk about it later. And to wrap up, so some of these emerging results for actionable bottom-up transformations. Just in general, there's some, again, many of the things that for both different populations that are here, the lack of labor is a problem, but there is also these alternative land uses that are willing to do that, but they need some more extension, which Brazil had just cut recently, and some of the fencing. Some interventions, when they do it, can just do simple fencing, and that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Many results to discuss. Okay, the next speaker is Jennifer Casolo. So,
hello, everyone. I'm going to describe the picture to begin my talk. Okay, es un comal en español, ¿verdad? Con las tres piedras en que se pone el comal para poner el fuego. Yo ni pude encontrar una buena foto y me imagino que se fue esto. I couldn't even. It is a plate, a hearth plate, with the stones underneath in order to put on. Okay. When your slides go wrong, okay, let's try. Starting again. Hello. The title of our large piece of work is sort of a longer reflection called The Three Stones of the Hearth Plate. The Three Stones of the Hearth Plate, if you were to see a photo, you would see a round ceramic plate on which a fire is built underneath. And traditionally, the Maya, and I'm sure people in other cultures as well, built it on three stones, which were considered the three stars of Orion's belt. And so it's very much part of Chorti cosmovision. positioning myself, and that comes back to the title, and I'm going to try to get past this quickly. I am working in this group, a mixture of myself, activist, researcher, living and working with the Maya Chorti since 2005, active in Central America, living in El Salvador in the 80s, Honduras in the 90s, going back to for graduate study in the early 2000s after almost 18 years in the field, becoming a geographer, and then choosing to stay with the Chorti and work and walk with them. So what I'm going to try to bring into this discussion about transdisciplinarity is that oftentimes it's walking with how people are making their bottom-up changes that is where the transdisciplinarity comes into play. And so that's what I'm going to try to get to. I want to give Nicholas Cuba, I'll speak to where each is. The rest of the team is a mixture of researchers with a NASA land cover and land use change grant, of which I'm a collaborator on. The head of the Chorti movement, Jacob Omar Jeronimo, who is on the International Land Coalition Steering Committee, and a long-time key leader in the bringing together of the three stones of the heart, Chorti Maya. And Peter Marchetti, who is a long-term activist. Okay, so I lost my whole time on a first page. Let's, next slide. Next slide. Oh, I have to do it. And I'm going to skip and go. How? It's not going to. Okay. None of my graphics are here. So. Yeah, I mean, without the graphics, it's almost meaningless. It's okay. We tested it beforehand. Okay. I'm going to ask for 2 minutes extra to make up. I'm going to talk as if I'm going to describe things. Okay? And we can keep Wither the Chorti East for a moment. The larger project that I began... This is unfair. It could... Instead of talking to my presentation, I'm going to try to say a couple of key things, okay? And just give up and maybe I get to bring it in later. First of all, I've been working on questions of transdisciplinarity since 2007, 2008. And one of the take-home points of some of the people doing critical transdisciplinarity is the idea of transgression and transcending. And I think that actually where transgression comes into play is, first of all, if we turn around where the bottom up is. So it's not co-production of transdisciplinary research actionable knowledge for bottom-up actionable knowledge, but how from starting at the bottom up. Okay. I hear. Okay. I need to let everything go. I'm a little ADHD, I'm telling you this, and discovered it only about 9 months ago from a PhD student of mine. So I'm realizing that I really have something important to say to you. It really dovetails with Elif's work. I'm going to tell a story. I'm going to tell the story of a NASA project spearheaded as an interdisciplinary project proposal by Nicholas Kuba and Laura Sowles, at that time at Clark University, and now at Auburn and George Mason, who approached me as being one of their 3 collaborators in the region. It's evaluating the drivers of climate change and of outmigration in the Northern Triangle. And where I live and work, and have lived and worked since 2005, is on the Maya Chorti borderlands between Guatemala and Honduras, in an area right in the middle of their research site. Their research plan was interdisciplinary, and what they needed from me in the first moment was working with local partners, especially on the Guatemalan side and maybe in Honduras, who could, where they could do survey data and develop the qualitative part of the research. So instead of having a bridging values approach, instead of having a decolonial or anti-colonial approach, not thinking pluriversity, there was a plan. I said, I would love to. My first commitment is to the Pluriversity Maya Chorti. The Pluriversity Maya Chorti is one of the 3 hearthstones. The other hearthstone is the Chorti Maya Institute for Science and Technology, UPECNAIHA, and the third hearthstone is the Grand Council of Chorti Ancestral Authorities. The image was discussed for 2 hours among Chorti ancestral leaders over whether they were a Comal plate with 3 stones or a human with 3 heads. And there was not an agreement. But for today, I took the Comal. The idea is that they said, we need to be the experts of our own development. We need to be creating the future generations of leaders based on our own ways of knowing and thinking. We need to revalue our ancestral knowledge. But it's an area where the width of the Chorti East would have shown you has been deeply made vulnerable by the processes many of you discussed. But we're talking wither as in their territory decreasing, and wither as where it's located. And so they also said, but we know we're little Chorti islands, like an archipelago surrounded by people who now define themselves as non-Chorti. We are criminalized. We have encroachments from extractive capitalism. We are already, our youth are already dreaming, the American dreaming going on. We need to draw on Western science, modern science, but we also need to discover our own knowledge. Okay, so the key here is that for this message, for the message for this moment, is that we built transdisciplinarity in and through Nick and Laura and this interdisciplinary project's willingness to rethink what they did in one site of their research as a way to rethink what the survey itself would look like. So the whole survey was redone by 14 Chorti Maya Pluriversity students who then met with ancestral authorities and met with their communities and practiced the survey and restructured it, gave it new meaning, gave it new language, and I won't say any more right now because I've gone way over my time, but take-home questions are about things you've already mentioned. Protocol. We build the protocol with the authorities so that they talk about what they want to learn, and we talk about what people on the outside think they can give or are interested in learning. Nick has brought drone research in. And so, the pluriversity is community-based action research, and the Institute does elder-based action research, which becomes the material of study for the ancestral knowledge for the pluriversity, as well as what is produced from this project will then turn into part of our curricular knowledge base, as well as leading to other projects and other courses. So we're in the middle. It's a part of a 20-year process, and one moment is in the middle. So the take-home point is what you're doing is in the middle. Solamente. I'm sorry.
Jennifer, thank you very much for the talk. And that was a great talk after you let go for the slides and the technical part. So we have this tight timing, I think 5 minutes for a joint reflection. What we wanted to get out, and now it's not moving anymore. Yeah, is a bit of why choosing co-production, co-development methods, and a transdisciplinary approach, and what do you think it does in terms of getting on a transformative path? And I would like to open it as a reflection to the speakers, so everyone who wants to rephrase that, so we can, because I realized that it's much more on the co-production part, also on the methods, and that was also more the content of what you taught. So maybe the link to the co-production and on which pathway. Is that clear? Anyone wants to take it first? Oh. No.
Thank you. My name's Andrew. I'm from Curtin University in Perth in Australia. Most of my work's with Aboriginal Australians in remote locations. I've forgotten your name, sorry, but I just want to pick up on your presentation, and congratulations to the presenters, because this session has really triggered more questions than answers for me, and I think that's the sign of a good session. One of the things that I personally feel consistently bound by is this idea of values. Because when you put in an application to get some money, you've got to tell the funder what you want to do. So straight away you've imposed your mindset, your timeframes, all those things on the work you want to do. So I'm just interested in, and so you've actually potentially disempowered your collaborators from before you even start collaborating with them. So I was just interested in how some of the speakers navigate that to ensure that they are actually truly transdisciplinary, are truly collaborative.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's always a huge issue, and the only way around is basically if you work in the same place with the same people over many years, and before you engage in the next proposal, you already know each other and have gone through this process. Because if you start from scratch, yes, then if you start with the proposal, then it's really, really hard. But even, I mean, there is never like the perfect solution. So even if you have the money, you have the grant, you have the plan, you can still go back and see, I mean, how do we all understand this plan? What are our assumptions about the pathways or the theories of change we laid out in this plan? And if there is no theory of change, then I think that's really the thing to do first, basically. Yeah, but maybe somebody else has a better idea.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm also following up on your presentation, but trying to answer what you just asked on how you're already disempowering the people you are going to work with. And I would also want to speak coming from the Global South. And most of the transdisciplinary work calls for Global South, Global North kind of collaboration. And the values sometimes are broken. And the values are broken at the point where the idea is not shared with the people who are being called to collaborate. So you are only asked to submit maybe a paragraph or two to enhance this proposal. So at that point, I think the value you discussed becomes necessary, but it's also broken. So, and then that brings me to my question. how do you ensure this power dynamic in values is also checked? Because if in your proposal you require, for example, PhD students, these are people without power. Mainly they're coming from global south and also global north. Some students cannot speak up for themselves. So at what point do your values come in and your power also come into play? Because these two things cannot be separated, and they build on to what he has said. So that this power just sits with the person who is aware of the values and the power because you have the money, or it translates to also taking care of the other person who's already disempowered, has their own values and their own cultures. Yeah. How do those connect? I don't get it.
I'm going to give this to you in just a moment. That's okay? No, I want to respond to that and offer one other broader idea in relation, because they can answer more how you guarantee for the PhD student. But I've been on the other end, where PhD students come with very, very eager, and we're in dialogue with them to want to be able to do research in engaged and transformative ways. And they have to write their project proposal, and they have to do individual research. And the thing that I wasn't able to talk to is the extractive assimilation complex that Leanne Betamasoki Simpson, who's a Mishawik indigenous poet and activist, talks about, where she says when you come in and take knowledge and make it yours, you are extracting and assimilating. And she says to counter that, you need deep reciprocity. And deep reciprocity depends on respect, relationship. It's respect, relationship, and responsibility. So PhD students with less power, and it needs to be with the local in the middle, so you don't disembed from the local. So if we can work with helping PhD students with limited power develop relations that they understand should be over time, that are respectful in whatever the local way of being respectful is, and that take responsibility, not just for giving back a paper that nobody can read, right? And so the examples here were great. The funding part, though, I
also want to say something about values and project and research. And I think it's really important, like Julie was saying, what is the values of the project and the values of the researchers. So like for our project, we take on the critical approach that we take on we take the perspective of the most vulnerable and hold the one with resources and authority accountable. So that is an inherent value of the project, and it was inherent in our project proposal, and it's inherent in how we do project research. But that is something that requires constant reflexibility among all our teams of different people, global north, south, different disciplines. So it's a lot of work, but I think it's values that you carry. So I appreciate that question, because it's not easy, and it's about publishing papers, but it's also about making sure research is accountable and useful also.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're running out of time, and lunch is waiting for you. Just with transdisciplinary project, or an approach that we learned takes time to implement properly, I think sessions and talks and discussions need time to give proper meaning. I mean, we had a bit of a flashlight here, but I'm deeply questioning this type of conferences where they talks. With that, I'll leave you to the lunch break.
Thank you, organizers.
Let's just thank the speakers. Thank you very much for your talks and participation of the audience.